So today I'm going to talk about Cello, but I want to start by talking about mycelium. Mycelium we know above ground as mushrooms, but below ground there's thousands of miles of mycelial network in each square foot of forests. And trees use this mycelial network to talk to one another. When you see mycelial network under a microscope, it looks like a nervous system. In fact, it is a nervous system. It is a biological network that passes messages and performs computations, and the health of the forest depends on it. And when I look at mycelium, when I first started looking at mycelium, I could not see the world the same way again. And the reason why is twofold. It brought up two questions. The first question was, in a world where we know that our own intelligence emerges from the neural networks in our brains, in our hearts, and our guts, what does that say about the intelligence of a forest, whose nervous system is much more intricate than ours? And I think the only conclusion that I come to is that the forest is intelligent in ways that we don't yet understand. The second question that comes up is, if the forest has a nervous system, what is the organism? Is it the forest or is it the tree? And I think the only conclusion that I come to is that we are at each level, from cell all the way to whole Earth, we are at the same time organism and ecosystem. Can you move the slide back, please? Can we just turn off the slides and I'll ad-lib. So we are at the same time organism and ecosystem. And the science fiction writer Arthur Koestler had a name for this thing that is at the same time ecosystem and organism, at the same time a whole and a part. And he called this a holon. But I actually don't need to know about holons or mycelium to understand the truth of this. The truth is, I feel like a whole, and at the same time I feel like a part of something greater than myself. And as a whole, I need agency, and as a part, I need communion. As a whole, I have unique purpose, and as a part, I am connected to all things. And those two things, unique purpose and connectedness, those are the two values on which we base Cello. And when I talk about it like that, these seem like facts, not values. It seems obvious, except for the fact that so much of our world is organized as if the opposite were true. If we take a look, for example, at our modern system of housing, houses look like one another, and so it doesn't honor unique purpose. But at the same time, there's no courtyards and common greens, and so it doesn't honor connectedness. If we take a look at schooling, people all learn the same thing at the same time, so it doesn't honor unique purpose. But at the same time, heaven forbid you help a friend on a test, and so it doesn't honor connectedness. And if we take a look at all of our institutions, from education to agriculture to housing, all of these systems are predicated on an industrial notion of separate selves, separate commodity selves who are self-interested. But just behind each of those are a more beautiful system that's waiting to arise, that honors unique purpose and connectedness. And so the question we asked ourselves, okay, what does a financial system that honors unique purpose and connectedness look like? And I'll start answering that by making three claims. I'll start by making a simple claim that devolves into three claims. The first claim is there are three intrinsic sources of wealth that we have as a society that are not recognized by our current financial system, and as a consequence, they're attenuated by it. The first is the unique talent of individuals. The second is the strength of our communities. And the third is the health and biodiversity of our global ecosystems. And I'll say a sentence on each of those, and propose an economic solution for each at a high level. So on the unique talent of individuals, the example that I always use here is Ramanujan. Ramanujan was an amazing mathematician who grew up in poverty in India, and through force of will got himself to the University of Cambridge in England, where he ended up writing up some of the most beautiful math that has been seen in the last century. And I would argue that there's not one Ramanujan, there's probably hundreds of Ramanujans, maybe thousands of Ramanujans. We just don't know it because they're focused on subsistence. And so that's why a universal basic income, to me, and universal financial access to financial tools are not just a moral imperative, they're an economic imperative. So that's the first. The second is the strength of our communities. I think if you go to a community where everybody knows one another, where the kids run down the street and play with each other, where when somebody gets sick, the neighbors come and bring food, we recognize this as wealth. That wealth is not recognized in the financial system, but it is there. And I would argue that there are systems of commerce that can facilitate that wealth. I call it community commerce. I live in a town of 5,000 people, and we have a main street, and the main street is all local entrepreneurs. And the local entrepreneurs form the backbone of the community. They know everybody in town, they know one another, they sponsor all the kids' sports teams, and they bring the community together. And so in that sense, commerce can strengthen community, and not just in local communities. Like I would say Kickstarter is community commerce. I would say Etsy is community commerce. And then the last one, the health and biodiversity of our global ecosystems. I think the economist E.F. Schumacher said it best when he said, you know, as economists, we are very careful to distinguish between capital and income. We make great efforts to do so. We put them separately on our balance sheets and our income statements. We tax them separately. We do all of this except where it matters the most, which is in the natural capital that we have inherited on this beautiful earth that we live. And in that case, and only that case, we liquidate our natural capital and delude ourselves to pretending that is income. But because a financial system is ultimately a system of accounting, we can change that so that the strengthening of our natural capital actually strengthens our wealth as we record it. And so that gives a kind of summary, a 50,000 foot view summary of the kind of financial system that we want to see. And one could call it an inclusive financial system in the broad sense of the word. It includes all people, it includes communities, it includes the environment. This is what we mean when we say prosperity for all. But I think the word inclusive is too weak. What I'd rather use is the word regenerative. We want a regenerative financial system that regenerates our natural talents, regenerates our communities, and regenerates the environment that we have been gifted. And so how do we get there? How do we get from the financial system that we have today to a regenerative financial system? And I would start by saying we start by changing the story. And we start by changing the story of the base layer. The story of the base layer in a financial system is money. And so we start by changing the story around money. And the blockchain reminds us that money is just a technology. And of course, it has always been a technology. But it's hard to remember that it's a technology because its features haven't changed for the past 350 years. But like any technology, its features can change. And like any widely used technology, its features have a big impact on the societies that use it. And so the question we asked when we started Cello is, what are the features of money that would lead to a more beautiful world? And we came to 5. The first is a universal basic income that's tied into the money system directly, that is tied into monetary policy. The second is this idea called demurrage. And demurrage is an idea by the economist Silvio Gesell, who was active in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he noticed that whenever there is a recession, people tend to hoard money, and that hoarding of money intensifies the recession. So he said, how do we get out of this? And he said, well, why don't we introduce a small fee to the holding of money? And that the way he implemented that fee was that he had these dollar bills that had stamps that you had to affix to them once a month, and the stamp cost 1 cent. This was used most notably in the town of Vorgel in Austria during the Great Depression, and it led to an increase in the velocity of money so much such that Vorgel was this oasis of prosperity in the midst of the Great Depression. People called it the miracle of Vorgel, and people, like the president of France, went to visit Vorgel. So anyway, these first two features I see as two sides of the same coin. A UBI is like rain, it ensures universal health, and demurrage is like evaporation, it ensures non-stagnation. The third feature is a feature called natural capital-backed currencies. And this is an idea by the philosopher Charles Eisenstein, who said, whatever backs money, people tend to make more of. When gold backed money, there was this intense incentive to mine gold because it was like printing money. In ancient cultures where cattle backed money, there was an overproduction of cattle because that was printing money. And so he said, well, why don't we back money with things that we want to see more of in the world, like pristine forests or clean rivers? And that's a beautiful idea, it's a powerful idea. And that's the third feature, called natural capital-backed currencies. The fourth feature is I remember when the internet first was coming out, people were like, whoa, like you could imagine putting the whole encyclopedia on the internet. And this was true, but it underestimated the true potentiality of the internet, which was that the encyclopedia would be a small part of a rich information ecology that included the encyclopedia. And so I remember as Bitcoin was coming out, people were like, whoa, like Bitcoin could replace fiat. And me, with hindsight, I was like, no, Bitcoin won't replace fiat. It will become big, and it will be powerful. Fiat will eventually go on chain, and that will be powerful. But both of those will be parts of a rich ecology of value that includes local currencies, regional currencies, global reference currencies, store value currencies, medium of exchange currencies, functional currencies, all interoperating in an ecosystem like the internet. So that's the fourth feature that I'll call community currencies. And the fifth feature is the creation of money without the creation of new debt. Right now, all money is created through debt, through interest-bearing debt. And so as a consequence, we always have more debt than we have money. We can never pay off our debts. And I'd argue at the beginning of the industrial age, that was a feature, not a bug. It impelled growth, and that growth has been good for us. But now that we're reaching the carrying capacity of the Earth, it's not clear that we'll be able to grow our way out of our problems. And on top of that, it's interesting to think about what human behaviors that manufactured scarcity creates. Economists will say, it is human nature, fear and greed are human nature. And we know this because we know people. But that's not my experience of people. And my experience of people is that we want to be loving, we want to be generous, we don't want to be fearful or greedy. But what I would contend is that fear and greed are natural in the context of scarcity. And if we have a money system where we never have enough money because we always have more debt than we have money, that may have a psychic effect on us. And I can imagine lots of ways to bring money into existence. I can imagine gifting money into existence. I could imagine people earning money into existence by doing pro-social things. I could imagine UBIing money into existence. And so that's the fifth feature. And these 5 features, they lend themselves to technologies. If we want to create a universal basic income, we need an identity protocol. If we want to create a universal basic income, we also need efficient like client support, because the people who need UBI the most are people who don't have computers. If we want demurrage, we need smart contracts. If we want community currencies, we need to be able to pay gas fees in the community currency. So we need to be able to have a gas UX. If we're going to have all of the financial system, we need to have super high scalability and super low gas fees. And a lot of these require technical innovations. And so the mission of Cello when we started was to create the technical primitives to allow for these kinds of money to exist. It is a technology that supports a story. And Bob Dylan once said, a song is a poem with wings. And I would take on that and make a modification and say a technology is a story with wings. So this outlines the origin technology, the base technology and the base story, the origin technology and the origin story of Cello. But in itself, it's too small. It's like a flower in the desert. It needs a community of stories and technologies to support it. Otherwise, it will wither. It needs projects like Impact Market and Good Dollar, who are creating UBI protocols that are being used by people who need them the most. It needs protocols like Resource Network and Humanity Cash, who are creating different community currency models on the Cello platform. It needs protocols like Toucan and Flow Carbon, who are tokenizing carbon credits and bringing them on chain. It needs projects like Loam and Ethic Hub, who are financing regenerative agriculture. It needs projects like Moss and Color, who are creating NFTs that will conserve the Amazon and the Patagonia. It needs projects like Bitmama and Katani Pay, who will provide on and off ramps in Africa in order to bring financial services to everybody in the globe. When I was at MIT, before this I was a professor at MIT, and I had a colleague, Neri Oxman, who she is an artist and an architect. And she had this project called the Silk Pavilion. And what she did is she had created a beautiful geodesic dome out of steel. And in and of itself, it was lovely. And I remember it was hanging in the lobby of our building. And one day, I noticed that there was a number of silkworms on the geodesic dome. And the silkworms started weaving a beautiful pavilion out of silk on that framework. And that, I think, is a metaphor for what we're doing here. The layer one and the story around the layer one is a framework, but what creates the beauty is a living system. Indeed, I would contend that beauty can only be created through living systems. And so Cello it defines what Cello is ultimately. Ultimately, Cello is a community. And what Cello is and will become is dependent on the stories and technologies that are built by the people in this room. It will become based on the unique purpose and connectedness of the people in the room and the entire community. And so it is my pleasure and honor to be here with the community today after 2 years of being apart. And I can't tell you how grateful I am. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being you, and welcome to Cello. Thank you.